Welcome to Swami Reacts, and today we'll be analyzing some features of this book from Edward Dimock, The Place of the Hidden Moon, Erotic Mysticism in the Vaishnava-Sahajiya Cult of Bengal. So The Place of the Hidden Moon is one of the old classics of scholarship on Gaudiya Vaishnavism and related branches or expressions, if you will. This was written by Edward Dimock, one of the first Western scholars to study traditions related to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. This was published originally in 1966, so almost 60 years ago, sorry. So as the subtitle mentions, this book mostly revolves around the notion of Sahajiyaism, and more specifically this notion of union between man and woman and how that's conceived as a microcosm of the macrocosm of Radha and Krishna, how there is a whole tradition, which of course in the most orthodox Gaudiya circles is considered as deviant or heterodox, to say the least, apasampradayik in some terms. And of course, I'm recording this video not precisely because I subscribe to the Vaishnava-Sahajiya conception, but still I found this work very interesting for many reasons, and that's why I decided to do a video about it. For some time already, I wanted to read this book because, as many other books like At Place with Krishna from John Stratoholly or Act as a Way of Salvation by Dave Haberman, these are some of the original old school scholarship pieces on Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And to be honest, I like to read scholarly papers at the same time, scholarly books on Gaudiya Vaishnavism, on other topics. At the same time, of course, being aware that mere scholarship doesn't give you access and entry into the secrets and mystery of any tradition, trying to bear in mind that tarko pratishthanat, like our tradition will say, or the Vedas will say, logic by itself doesn't take you anywhere. So it should be coupled by revelation, by shraddha, by faith, by approaching revelation with proper faith. But logic has a place in its own. And I would say scholarship has a place in its own. I really appreciate witnessing the perspective of people who are not insiders to a tradition and how they approach it. And again, it's a different method altogether. If you're a scholarship, this is Dimock's, I think, thesis originally for his PhD, if I'm not mistaken. So it's written from a very particular impartial place, rigorous in terms of intellectual, again, neutrality, and addressing and analyzing a particular topic, not as an insider. I mean, he was not a Gaudiya Vaishnava himself. So I really appreciate those type of detached views of a tradition that can shed some other perspectives that, though they are not imbued with the faith of an insider, still offer some type of perspective, some type of darshan. Darshan ultimately can be translated as perspective, like we have the different schools of philosophy called darshans, right? The 6 darshans. So darshans in one sense is an angle of vision, a perspective on reality. And I always recall Father Richard Rohr mentioning how he chooses to inhabit his tradition from on the edge of the inside. Like if the tradition will be a circle and the center of the circle, you have those who are so inside the circle that they are not aware of whatever is happening outside of that inside. He chooses to remain inside the circle, but on the edge of the inside, not on the edge of the outside, throwing stones as an outsider, but inside, but close enough to the edge, so we can see and we can hear what's being said, what's going on the other side of the wall, so to say, and be enriched and informed by those perspectives. So that's my stance. That's what I choose. I'm not establishing this as something that everyone should be doing, but I personally have felt very much nourished by taking that stance. I don't think that has affected my faith in Gaudiya Vaishnavism negatively. The day I'm recording this video, actually, interestingly, is the 25th anniversary from the day I received for the first time initiation in this tradition. So a quarter of a century has passed, and somehow still I'm here, not to claim anything. But my point is, I still identify as a Gaudiya Vaishnava. At the same time, I still identify as someone who chooses to live also on the edge of the inside and chooses to be informed by other sister traditions and believes in a universal foundation present in different mystical wisdom lineages. And scholarship, again, is a secular discipline, not necessarily religious in essence, but can offer alternative perspectives. Again, it doesn't mean that I agree, of course, with everything that Edward Dimock speaks about. Of course, in the context of him speaking about Vaishnava-Sahajiyaism, he speaks a lot about Mahaprabhu and his followers, because this tradition of the Vaishnava-Sahajiya Cult of Bengal revolves around mostly Sri Chaitanya, which is considered by them the union of Radha and Krishna, as in the same way that these two become one. The Sahaja practice of Bengal attempts that man and woman become together in sexual union, trying to attain a union beyond the separation that still exists in their consciousness. And of course, I always consider it proper to be informed about whatever you even criticize or consider that's not my cup of tea. Because from the distance, we can see, oh, all these Sahajas just want to have wild sex with one another, justified in God. And the more you study this, I studied this book. I studied years ago a book also by another scholar called, I think, The Place of Devotion, also revolving around the Sahaja tradition. And you can see that it's not just about a justification to have sex. There's a lot of ritual. There's lots of philosophy. Again, I'm not subscribing to that. That's not my cup of tea, but I think it's good to even be properly informed about what we reject or what we consider not my cup of tea, right? What to speak of being properly informed about what I'm accepting, right? Whether I'm accepting something as my tradition, as my philosophy of life, as whatever, or whether I'm rejecting or not, maybe rejecting, but not embracing certain path. Both of those things should be done with proper education and proper information as much as we can. Because if not, I may be rejecting something for the wrong reasons. I also may be accepting something for the wrong reasons. So going back to my choice, I may be sorry if I'm not talking so much about the details of the book. I'm just mentioning briefly some of the name of the chapters. For example, the Vaishnava-Sahajiya synthesis, further historical observations, caste, woman, Sahaja movement, the ideal mind in society, physical and metaphysical basis for the Sahaja sadhana, principles of sadhana, the bowls of Bengal. That's very nice. The last chapter talking about the bowls and the apparent connection between them and Sahajas, and Sufism and Gaudiya Vaishnavism, orthodoxy, heterodoxy, different readings of how the Sahajas read many of our own texts, Chaitanya Charitamrita, books of the Goswami, through a Sahaja lenses. And again, I don't agree with the reading. I don't think that's what is being said there. But it's still interesting for me to entertain other perspectives, not to entertain in terms of maybe I should join that in this case, but to open myself to how other people sees the same reality or the same tradition I'm embracing. I think in itself, that has some value. That's virtuous. If again, I'm not saying you should do that from day one you are joining your tradition, because you are yet not properly grounded in the very tradition you are joining. So one needs to take deeper roots and be properly informed about what's the orthodoxy about your tradition, so to say. And then, and I'm not saying everyone should do that, but then those who feel invited or called to do that, one can become more educated about other alternative perspectives on your own tradition. I think that's an interesting nuance. Not only, okay, how Christians think, how Jewish people think, what's Islam about, and so on and so forth, but how other people from my own tradition live the tradition. And by this, I'm not just saying ISKCON, Gaudiya Math branches, which ISKCON is one branch of Gaudiya, what's so-called sometimes traditional parivars, but also what sometimes we call Apasampradaya in some circles, no? Like, again, Sahajas, bowls, Gornagar, Bath. Again, things that I may personally think that's not my cup of tea, but their views sometimes, or their points, or their reading of certain sections posit a challenge also to our own reading of things. So I think it's healthy, again, at some stage of the journey for us to be exposed with certain alternative readings of one's own tradition, some of which we may clearly disagree with good reasoning, and some of them we may need to entertain and contemplate and not be so quick to reject without any deep basis. So for me, that's a very interesting contribution that I consider that after reading this book, again, I'm more enriched. And again, historical, scholarly study sometimes also sheds light on in a more objective, again, neutral light, which I think sometimes is necessary because let's be honest, sometimes as part of a spiritual tradition, and I've been recording yesterday a podcast with Ravi Chambers about that, about storytelling, about legends, about how hagiographies or the biographies of religious figures sometimes add their own spice to the story, which may not be literally true, which may not be a fact that actually happened. Especially in India, I remember reading from Sri Vatsa Goswami a part of a compilation called Vaishnavism done by Satyaraj Prabhu, and he will speak about how Indians, in terms of biography, they generally tend to focus on bhava, not on facts, on history. So bhava means the emotion, how to evoke the proper emotion in the reader. And if for the sake of that, we may need to add this spice and that spice, maybe that actually happened, but we can do it. They take a license, a permission for that, for the sake of bhava. You follow my point? But on the basis of that, sometimes some things may be overtly over-idealized, over-expanded. Some legends may be formed around things that do not necessarily need to become legendary or facts that do not need to be taken literally. And sometimes comes this problem with the literal reading of things that sometimes require a more nuanced reading, more interpretative reading, more socio-historical reading in the context of other information that comes at the time, which sometimes may seem to contradict some details. Again, nothing of that is about compromising or questioning the depth and essence of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition or any tradition for that matter. But yes, to be careful not to over-idealize, over-expand, over-expect certain aspects. Again, in certain level of faith, we may need that. Everything is legendary. Everything is maximized. Everything is hyperbolic. It's a feature of the Kanishta faith. And whomever doesn't subscribe to my absolutistic black and white, all or nothing type of faith, you're a heretic, a deviant, offender, and so on. There is not space for much nuance. But as we grow and as we mature and as we get educated and informed and learn from different perspectives, we can allow some of those things to nourish, I will say, not disturb, hopefully, but nourish our faith, inform it, make it more broad and deep and accommodating, not to the point that you can accept anything and everything becomes the same and a hodgepodge where everything becomes nothing. But there is place for nuance, for history, for scholarship, for secular disciplines, informing my own pursuit of my path. So anyhow, from my place, this is one of many books that I've studied throughout the years that have fulfilled that function. So for those who would like to have that experience, who feel that they're ready for such an experience, of course, this is it. Of course, there's not much of a detailed description of what's the Sahaja practice per se. There's one brief section that they mentioned that because this is pretty much performed and shared and talked in secrecy. So the whole thing revolves around other considerations, historical considerations, again, readings of sections from Chaitanya Charitamrita, books of the Goswamis, other books from the Sahaja branches, reflecting back on some of the teachings from our Sampradaya. So interesting experience. The Place of the Hidden Moon, Erotic Mysticism in the Vaishnava-Sahajiya Cult of Bengal. If you have read it or whatever thoughts you have to share with us, please feel free to do so in the comment section. I'm happy to meet you again in our next episode of Swami Reacts.